are recording. So I'd like to start out with Karen, and a question that's been on lots of people's minds, and I've seen it a lot on the listserv, at least on the DRAW, Family Law Attorneys listserv, is what are we doing now about moving kids between homes? Two-home family life and transition issues. That's a burning question for a lot of people. And start out, Karen, why don't you give us some thoughts and insights on that?
You bet. Thanks, Joe, and thanks for everybody to be here. You know, two-home family life, we spend a lot of effort and energy trying to talk with parents about how to create a sense of home for their children, both their home with one parent and a home with another parent, or mom and dad, mom and mom, dad and dad, whatever the case may be. And suddenly, in the face of a pandemic, what we want to make sure we don't do is undo all of that good work. So what I'm wanting parents to think about is how to make sure that they're managing this sense of home across two residences for their children. Now, what does that mean, and how do we go about doing that? Well, it means that as adults, we're getting on the phone, we're getting a conference call. Maybe it's the entire parenting coalition, because I know for many of you, either for your clients or for yourselves, there are other adults in a household, right? And so we call that the parenting coalition. It includes step parents or domestic partners. Let's get those adults on the phone and let's talk about what are the rules for the road. What does this two-home family ascribe to? Now, we have guidelines from the governor as recently as last night, so we know what that means. No socializing, no going out in groups, no public gatherings, et cetera, et cetera. But two-home family life isn't that. Two-home family life, we can do essential things like go to the grocery store and go to the pharmacy. We can certainly safely transition children between their parents. The key thing is, how do we manage our own anxiety, and how do we come together as a parenting coalition or as co-parents to clearly define what those parameters are? What are you doing in your household? Well, here's what I'm doing in their home here with me. And how can we cinch that up in a way that everybody feels like we're doing what we can reasonably and effectively to protect everyone, including, you know, obviously anyone in the household. Now, you know that if we were a one-home family, if any of our clients were still in a one-home family, they wouldn't be telling each other, you can't see the children. Now, they might, as a team, agree that I'm going to sleep in the mother-in-law. If I'm an emergency room physician, for example, we might together decide that I'm going to sleep in the mother-in-law for some period of time. We might not. I work with a number of co-parents who are healthcare providers frontline on this pandemic. They would no more endanger their children than jump off a cliff. And they are transitioning their children between households, and they are doing everything they need to do and can do to make sure that their two-home family life is safe for themselves, for their co-parents and the people in their co-parents' household, and for their children. So we can do this. Now, another question that's come up, what if I have a vulnerable child? Well, you have a chosen healthcare provider for that child, a primary care provider. Go to that primary care provider and say, hey, is the condition that my child has, allergies, for example, what if my kiddo's an asthmatic? What if my kiddo had RSV as an infant, right? Respiratory distress syndrome of some sort. Does that count? Does that matter? Does that now suggest that that kidlet, you know, shouldn't be out at all, right? That's a healthcare question. That's not a legal question. So use your healthcare providers wisely, that you're consulting nurses for, right? So what we want to be sure is that we don't default into parenting as a competitive sport. I'm the better parent, I'm the cleaner parent, I'm the whatever fill in the blank parent. No, parenting's not a competitive sport. Let's put our heads together. We need, as usual, A+ parenting. Let's be the best parent we can be. Let's do that in a way that's coordinated. That includes our parenting coalition. Let's be thoughtful about what's prudent. And let's remember that at the end of this, we want our physical, not just our physical, but our emotional health intact, particularly the emotional health of everyone in our families, but our children, right? We can take a difficult, uncertain, and to some extent scary situation and make it traumatic if we behave poorly. If we use this as an opportunity to do a land grab or become overly anxious or begin to repopulate all that conflict that we might have been in during our divorce. So remember, one thing we know for sure is conflict is toxic. The other thing we know for sure is conflict lowers our immune resistance. Be thoughtful about that. When you're working with your clients, when you're working with each other, let's be strong, be prudent, be thoughtful, but also let's be reasonable and let's really love on our kids. They need us. They need us to be engaged.
Talk a little bit about what you mean when you say parenting coalition.
The Parenting Coalition, Joe, is the co-parents. Obviously, they're the people who are legally responsible for all decisions related to a child. But in a healthy step family, the step parents or domestic partners who are involved in children's lives on an ongoing basis grow into what we call a parenting coalition. It is the group of adults who put their heads together on behalf of children. Now, they're not voting members. The co-parents are the only voting members on behalf of children, but they're important members, and their opinions and their actions and their contributions to a child's life and to a family is extremely important. So particularly at times like this, we want to include their voices in our process.
Beautiful, thanks. Yoshimi, Chris, do you have anything else to add around that question of transitions? How to handle transitions in this era of pandemic?
I probably do, but perhaps it would be good to hear if we've got some questions, because I'll go right into my thing about kind of really dovetailing on what Karen's talking about.
Okay, I'm looking at my Q&A queue, you guys, queue. There aren't any questions quite yet. There's one. This one said, we may touch this later. Thank you for setting this up. I'm looking for creative options that you can use for parents beyond Skype and makeup visits, and how to advise high conflict parents who can't seem to agree on much, not exchanges or following the parenting plan. Another question, can kids go back and forth right now between homes according to the schedule before the pandemic? Go.
So Joe, will you read that again? You were cutting in and out for me, so yeah. I think I heard it, but would you just read it again? No, thank you.
Can kids back and forth right now between homes according to residential schedule in place before the pandemic?
There's nothing in the governor's orders as I've read them that indicates that this is not a safe and acceptable transition between a child's two homes. Remember, they have one family. It does go across two residences, that's true, but it's one family, one set of parents, one childhood. Let's be clear about that. And no different than we are able to go pick up our medicine at the pharmacy or grab essential groceries at the grocery store, we can safely put our child into our vehicle and drive them, and with safe practices, transition them to their other home. There's nothing on a healthcare scale or from the government, the governor's particular request of all of us that indicates that that can't be safe and can't be something that we can do. At least not as I read it. I mean, it's pretty clear. We are allowed to go outside. We are allowed to go to the grocery store. We are simply not to do social gatherings. We're not to do funerals and weddings, big celebrations. But as far as moving a child safely between their two homes, there's nothing that indicates that that's off limits.
And I think this is a good segue. If we're not having a lot of questions, I'll just kind of go into it. Maybe it'll generate some more. But that one comment about, high conflict parents, really what I would tell parents is that the risk that you are actually causing your children by having that conflict, by having this really inflexible stance, is actually much worse. Because what we do know about kids is, and people in general, that the first line of defense when there is any sort of kind of stress all the way to trauma is connection. So, if you look at the outcomes for people who have been in a really, there were some studies in World War II in London and the bombing, what we saw was the kids who actually stayed with their parents actually fared better mental health wise, even though they saw stuff that was really traumatic. It was the kids that were completely cut off. Those are the kids that are having the most trouble. So, really, when you look at this, if you want to help your children, you're going to have to be flexible. That does not mean that, and this is, again, I like that idea of the coalition. You may not agree with everybody in your coalition, but this is where you come together about how do we flex a little bit. Maybe you think it's a little too much that somebody wants to do, make a person comfortable because they're worried about grandma. So, if you can do it, do it. This is time limited. So again, my first point would be connection is probably to both their parents, to their family members, in whatever way, shape, or form that meets that child's needs is the most important.
A quick moderator request. People have been sending me comments or questions via the chat function, and my screen is cutting off this chat function, so I can't read completely what people are saying. Could you please send me those in the Q&A section? Send them as questions, because that shows up right in the middle of my screen and I can see it all very well. Thanks. Also, a question somewhat similar to what you said, but I'll read it. How do you recommend a narcissist parent? No such things. There's no narcissistic parents. I'm sorry. How do you recommend handling a narcissist parent when there is no court system to override the, quote, I'm going to do what I want, close quote, attitude of one parent? Possession is 9/10 of the law problem.
I'll just step in as somebody who works as a coach. There will be, I'm going to say, somewhere around 10 or 13% of our co-parenting peers who, without the assistance of the courts, without the assistance of some threat of incarceration or sanction or whatever, that are not going to be managed. And honestly, during this pandemic, the other 83 or 87% of our co-parents are doing absolutely the best they can. And I think it might be wise to focus our energy on those who really are. We don't have any, I know I don't have any magic bullets or magic answers for someone who is reckless and who intends to be reckless with their children. I don't know that we can stop that any better than, in a pandemic, any better than we can in everyday life. But I do want to be able to tend to parents whose anxiety is high, who wants to do best by their kids, who want to make sure that this time is remembered as, difficult, uncertain, interesting. I was out of school, I have lots of memories, but not traumatic. We want them to remember it as a time when my parents and my step-parents or my family members really pulled together, and I didn't see one of my parents, but you know what, they used to drive up in the car and sit, and I could play in the front yard, and we could just visit that way. That really worked. I wasn't afraid that I was going to lose a parent. I wasn't afraid I was going to lose my second grade teacher. I wasn't afraid I was going to lose everything because my parents were anxious and fighting. That's what we want to communicate. And that, as legal professionals, we really want to be sure that we're supporting families to understand that. My 2 cents.
I'd like to add a thought and a shout out, Bill Eddy. Those of you who aren't familiar with him, EDDY. Bill is a who has a pretty vibrant practice, mediation practice down in San Diego, and he has written some wonderful books. He runs something called the High Conflict Institute, and Eddie has written some wonderful books about how to work with and manage people who have personality disorders. And one of the most prevalent personality disorders that we deal with is the narcissistic personality disorder. And so number one, I really want to recommend those of you who are not familiar with Bill Eddy, I strongly recommend you get his book. I think it's something like Working with High Conflict Personalities in Divorce. It's excellent. And by the way, might as well do a shout out to Karen and Chris, who wrote the co-parenting book, which is a resource for all parents who are going through divorce. Point I want to make, though, with regard to so-called narcissistic parents is people right now are scared to death. They don't know what's going on. There is not a lot of guidance that people are getting. And when that happens, people's anxiety just shoots through the roof. And when people are anxious, they're going to move to extreme iterations of whatever it is they do. And if a person tends to be frightened and close things up and create boundaries, they are going to make those boundaries a mile thick if they are scared. And so one of the strong suggestions I have for anybody working with the parents who are going through this is give them radical empathy. Let them know that you understand how frightening a time this is, and that it's hard to make decisions, and that there is a tendency to want to, bring up the drawbridge and protect yourself and anything around you. And that's understandable because it's based on fear. And I think that with sort of gentle guidance, we can help people hopefully calm down a bit, slow it down a bit, so that they'll be less likely to make these radical choices that people, particularly on the attorney listserv, describe as being pretty radical. Going back to a question. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Shimi.
Can I add something?
Please.
I think this is a good time to kind of piggyback on that, what you have been talking about, and also earlier question about the high conflict parents. I would like to share that I'm sure that many of you have already read the Chief United Family Court Judge Helson's address on March 17th. And in part, even though this was written for attorneys, as somebody who worked with parents on the ground level, as a co-parent coach or parent coordinator, the parts really read really well for their message. And I changed a few words there to make it really meaningful to my co-parents that I work with. So can I just read a few sentences?
Please.
Okay. So the judge says, crises such as the one we are in tend to bring out the best and the worst in people. And here I changed a little bit. The bridge that you took when you became parents requires more of you than trying to advantage yourself in this difficult situation at the expense of your children. I hope that your commitment to your children, your pledge of parents, or a basic sense of human decency will guide you to be the best co-parent during this trying time. So I kept thinking about this and working with some of the co-parents who have already gone through kind of selfish mode under the crisis. And for example, I have already seen that at least one parent taking advantage of the situation to promote kids' favoritism by telling her son that he doesn't have to do any schoolwork for the next several weeks during her residential time. Whereas her co-parent tend to be a lot more rigid in trying to set up certain programming when he is at his residential time. So guess which house this son wants to be staying all the time. So, and then another time, and I think Joe touched upon really nicely about the generosity or the empathy, is that this is a parent who was very upset and that his co-parent was late in picking up the children from his home. And this was right after the school shut down with a 2-day or sometimes even a day notice. And so he was very irritated that she could not pick the son up because this mother had to do a catch-up work in her office because after school closure, she had to take a time off to organize all the childcare and all that. And then that delayed her project, and then that caused the delay in her work. So I was just kind of astonished by rigid thinking that under the crisis that if you are to be expecting your co-parent to be following these parenting plans to the teeth, that may not be realistic. So I think that's where our empathy toward another human being really comes into the place. And then this is especially in light of trying to raise your children. So I would say the few kind of mantra that I'd like to convey to co-parents, stay flexible and be understanding. And as Karen always say, it's a teamwork. Parenting is a teamwork, not a competitive sport. And you are together in it, in this crisis.
Beautiful. Thanks. Are you done?
Thank you for allowing me to pitch in.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's good.
Okay. Next question. What if a child has cancer and is still in treatment? What's your advice in the situation when the other parent is high conflict, not abiding by government directives, and unwilling to talk to the other parent about their pandemic adjustment with the child? I think Karen might have an answer to that. But before she does, I want to read the next question, which is kind of similar. What if one parent is totally flaunting COVID-19 guidelines, as this has now taken on some political overtones due to the down of the risk? Parents and adults do not believe this is a real risk. How are you handling that? So those are actually two different questions, but
They have similar answers, Joe, from my point of view. As many of the people watching know, I'm actually a nurse practitioner by training. So I am a healthcare provider in my original life, trained as a nurse. I want to go back to, if I have a child in cancer treatment, I am expecting my co-parent to get on the phone with my child's oncologist or, again, primary care physician to discuss what are the parameters for any kind of transitioning. If we have a child at risk, this is a healthcare issue. This is not a divorce issue. This isn't a parenting plan issue. This isn't a legal issue. It is, what are the recommendations of our jointly chosen healthcare provider? Remember, when we decided to get an oncologist, we chose who that was together. We're now going to lean into the recommendations of that provider. That's our best way through this conflict. That's the best way to get good enough guidance, the best guidance we can get. Again, even if we're looking at this in 2-week arcs, which is the other thing I want to bring up, let's look at anything we're doing in a 2-week arc. Even as Governor Inslee handed down this most recent set of guidelines for the state of Washington, he was very clear. It's a 2-week arc. Now, it might be extended. We don't know. He doesn't know. He hasn't said yet. But I think as co-parents, let's look at these things in 2-week arcs so that we don't over-exaggerate or over-scare ourselves about what we're doing. If I have a co-parent who is just completely disregarding the public health and the governor's request for managing COVID-19, I think that's a completely different circumstance. Again, I would attempt to use my healthcare provider to insist that in the best interest of the child, he's with adults who are going to behave by following the public health practices and by following the governor's requests and the healthcare providers' recommendations. But again, I think we're back in that 13% of parents that often don't respond to the ways that we typically work with families that do only respond to someone like the judge or a police officer or similar. So I want to just notice that.
So this is a very interesting question. Let's say I'm a parent and I am being I'm being as conscientious as I possibly can. I'm not going out. If I go to the store, I certainly wear gloves. If I have a mask, I mask up. I do everything I possibly can. I wash my hands when I get home. I'm conscientious. And the other parent is on lines. They are actually still spending time with people in close proximity. They're engaging in high-risk behaviors. How do I, as a conscientious parent, respond to that in terms of having my child go back and forth and ultimately, conceivably, be a carrier to bring it back into my home if the other parent's not being conscientious? What the heck do I do?
Again, I'd be getting on the phone with a consulting nurse, with my healthcare provider. We don't have any, I mean, I could call the police. What are they going to do, right? I mean, Governor Inslee did say that this is voluntary, that at the same time, I mean, his exact words were that it's not going to be punishable, but it could be, I think is what he said. You know, I prefer that this is voluntary, but let there be no mistake. These are, you know, handed down as rules to be followed, but we don't have time. We don't have time to argue about these things. You know, if they're already happening, they're already happening. How do we appeal to the best parent in each of us? How do we stay in relationship enough that we have influence? Remember, our greatest influence with one another is when we're in relationship, right? I'm more likely to be able to get someone to listen to me, to hear me, to accept my appeal, to honor my requests if we're in relationship. If I've been a complete difficult person to get along with and I continue to act in ways that are harmful, my co-parent's not going to listen to me. I'm the least possible person to influence them. And in part why I say get a neutral third party, get the pediatrician involved, the oncologist involved, the consulting nurse involved, because maybe that person who has no dog in the arena has no reason other than to say, I want your child to be safe. I just want your child to be safe. I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to disadvantage you. I just want your child to be safe, right? If we do this, sorry, Chris.
No.
I was going to say, if we do this well, our kids are still going to grow up. They're going to be doing their developmental tasks. They're going to have their developmental needs, which is connection to both of their parents, which is safety with their siblings. We have to kind of remember what are we doing in a pandemic and how are we doing that with one another? Chris, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I really want to, so because I'm feeling like a lot of I was reading some of the questions, and a lot of them are that real specific, what do I do in this situation? And I really wanted to, that really resonated with me about you have so much more power when you are in relationship. And there was one particular question about maybe a step parent being a healthcare provider and one of the parents being really worried about that. And, this is the time at which you need to kind of make the circle bigger. This is, if you're going to have any influence in your family, that step parent is part of your family. That way you're going to be able to talk about maybe some ways to make it safer without that parent just shutting that drawbridge like you talked about, being able to say, okay, well, this is our fear. What can we do in a larger sense? That's where you're going to have the most impact. I did want to really quickly, because I do think, and hopefully I don't send you guys into another area, but I did want to talk about, this is the issue, is that when we're talking about parent conflict, did you notice how we're talking about parents and we have totally moved off on what kids need? And that's what happens when families are in conflict. The adults get so lost in their stuff, they're not looking at their kids anymore. And they're not seeing if they're scared or if they're grieving or if they need information. So I wanted to kind of stop and jump in and go, and really what children do.
You wanted to stop and go, what?
I want to go. I know, I do. It's that, so what children are really needing is if parents could take some of that energy, and yes, you're going to be scared. And there's a lot of people, you've got this big group of people, and the most anxious is always the canary in the coal mine. And they're like, this is what I'm worried about. This is just how family works. But turn to your kids, take a look at how they're doing, and ask them. Ask them what they know before, when we talk about telling children about what's going on, ask what they know already. They may be watching news and you have no idea, or they may have heard things. So ask them what they know. And then also, just allow them to be able to have whatever reaction they need. I mean, that don't try to shut things down too soon, because children may have all sorts of, they may be grieving, then they may be angry, and then they may be scared and all sorts of stuff. But what information you give them, it should be fact-based. We don't know everything. So sometimes that answer is going to be, I don't know. And we're not quite sure. And that's okay. Then, also being able to speak calmly, because this is where parents can really influence their kids. If, parents are getting really scared, that is going to transmit to the kid. I mean, we're supposed to see and pick up all sorts of information about voice tone and facial expressions, and kids do. So speak calmly, give actual information, let them have their emotions, ask them what they know. If they're hearing things that are actual, if they read one report and it's scaring the bejesus out of them, put it in context, and do the Mr. Rogers thing where you talk about the helpers. When, talk about how many people are helping to make this, for people to feel better. And lastly, and I'll stop after this, lastly, bring in control. We all feel better when we have a sense of control, whether that control is actually directly in control, but we feel better when we're doing something. So even when we talk about sheltering in place, talk about how that actually really helps. Talk about what we're doing for the community or for grandma or for the family. Talk about if kids are really struggling, give them things to do that help. Maybe, I don't know, those are lots of community sort of resources. I was kind of stopped for a second because you also have to balance out, how much kids can do and what we know about the virus and what we don't. But anything where they can feel like they might be taking part, that's great. We all need that. Actually, the adults do as well. So that's my little spiel.
Yeah, well, like replacing the plumbing, for example, having the children help out with that sort of thing.
No, actually, I have an idea.
Yeah.
Because I have been thinking about this for my teen who's home, and how to kind of best utilize this time to make it a teachable moment, and then also to do a civic lesson in some ways. So we we sent out the email to my neighbors and basically invited them to ask for help. So if they are a high-risk population due to their health concerns or the age, we would be happy to go out and do the grocery shoppings and pharmacy runs and whatever that is going to be helpful for them. And then in that, I invited my team to join me so that we together as useful for our community and do our part by using this opportunity. I was thinking originally trying to start sewing the mask for the medical providers, but apparently the state of Washington does not take a cotton-made mask like Indiana is doing. So that's how I kind of moved on to it. And I also have another friend in a different community who's putting together a care package for their elderly neighbors. And she has much younger children, and then that's something she could do with her kids. And so they're going to just, leaving those in front of their doorsteps, but the kids also feel useful what they're doing.
Oh, beautiful. Chris, can you talk for a moment about how to speak to kids in an age-appropriate way based on various levels of development around this?
Yeah, I think just, the simpler the better. And I think even for very young kids, I mean, still be mindful about if they have contact with other people, asking them what they know. Children are going to be really looking to the adults, and you can always layer on. You can go from simple to more complicated, or, adding context as because this is ongoing. So it might be for really young kids, just talking about why these things, why you're doing something different. Picture it as if you would just like divorce or just like moving to another country or visiting another country, you talk about the changes, and then you say, and you explain why. And you give a kid a good sort of explanation as to why, a resilient explanation. So being able to, so for very young children, you're probably just going to be talking about why they're home from school, why they're home from daycare, why they can't see their friends. And I think it's probably good to not expect for them to be happy about it. They're not going to understand. You're simply layering on an explanation as to why they're doing this, which helps them, even if they don't like it, feel better. So maybe you say that the reason why you can't see your friends is because, there's a illness or sickness, people can get sick. And we want to keep as many people safe as possible. Again, you're kind of bringing in the community or people that they know, and that, we want to keep grandma and grandpa safe. And so that they feel that they're doing this for a reason. You could say something along the lines of, the more that we do this now, the quicker we're going to get to where we can all kind of be together again. That, really make sure that they know that this is time limited. We don't know when it's going to end, but that it is time limited, and they can, have hope that this, for the future. I think for older kids, they're going to be looking more at, the news themselves. They're going to be talking with their friends. And so I think for those, it's more of a conversation around, managing their own fears, or helping them to find good information, or showing them information about what's happening. And so I would welcome specific questions. The other thing would be, again, just like divorce, just like any sort of changes, it's really helpful if both parents are generally kind of keeping the same, you don't have to use the same words, but, if you've got a, kind of co-parenting relationship, coalition relationship that's very open, I would say, hey guys, what do you think we should be saying? This is kind of what I'm thinking. if you don't have that, I think it's good to at least, you know, whether or not it just goes into a black hole and you never hear about it again, just send what it is that you're saying, which is kind of like, here you go. This is what I'm sharing. This is why, FYI, boom. They don't have to respond to you, but at least, you know, they might. Just take it into consideration.
I have an interesting question from a lawyer, and it's a great lawyer question. It says, I'm running into disputes about whether we are in the regular school schedule, which is section 3.2 of the parenting plan, or the quote, school break schedule, and even the summer schedule. So there is some disagreement as to what part of the parent plan is being invoked and oh, it says my internet connection is unstable, so I hope people can hear me. Let me throw that out to you guys. This is interesting because this is a mental health child specialist panel, and yet I imagine you may have some because you're all certainly familiar with parenting plans and the sections of parenting plans. What are your thoughts about that? How to think about what section of a parenting plan may be applicable at this point in time?
Should I go?
Oh, I was gonna
Go.
Go, Yoshimi,
Oh,
go.
okay. Okay, sorry. So as far as my co-parents goes, whom I'm helping them to coordinate as my parent coordinator capacity, they are all under the regular residential plan. And within it, though, we are more talking about the content of basically everybody's homeschooling. So how can we develop the content so that the parents can work at the same time kids are engaged in doing something meaningful? And then also using, as Chris said earlier, using this opportunity crisis to foster their parental relationship with their children, whatever their age is, and then age appropriate way, and use opportunity as learning, part of learning. So again, this might take a little bit more coordination because their content is richer when the kids are home and you have to be working at the same time. But as far as the residential plan goes, I think everybody seems to be agree. My parents, at least, seems to be agreeable that this is a regular time.
Mm-hmm.
Yoshimi, you're cutting in and out a bit. And I wonder if how close you are to your router. You can figure that out as other people are commenting. What comments any additional comments, Chris or Karen?
So again, I'm going to come from a different perspective. Some people may feel that this is not concrete enough, and I totally understand. I mean, I get it. When you're dealing with people who are not kind of in that, flexible sort of place, this can be really frustrating. But I do the best I can at getting people to that flexible place. And sometimes that means very direct sort of being very direct. I would look at a parent and I'd say, who cares? What can you do in your family to meet the need? So if you're having a conversation with your parent, being able to say, okay, this is what I've got going on. What do you got going on? How can we make this work? And moving towards solving that problem. If it means that, okay, we're doing kind of hybrid here, that's what I'm going to recommend. And for some people, that might not be realistic. I understand. But even when you're having conflict, if you can find little pieces where you can be flexible and saying, hey, this is what I got, risk it, try it. So I don't know. Karen, you got anything?
100%. And I love, Chris, you're risking to say sometimes like, who cares? I can't tell you how often I look at parents and I say, what's good parenting? Which is kind of the same question. What's good parenting? What an opportunity if children aren't in school and parents are both more available, perhaps for more time with each parent. You know, and maybe the opposite. Maybe I will make an agreement with you in 2-week chunks that the kids stay in one residence, but let's agree that then during the summer break from school, we move to a week on week off schedule or a more balanced schedule during the summer so that I have a chance to make up some of the time that I am as a good parent. I'm saying, let's minimize transitions. I get it. I'm a police officer or I'm in one of those roles. I work at a grocery store. By the way, I do want to just make a comment about that. I think that our folks who are in the front lines are probably doing more and more effectively the things that they need to be doing to protect themselves and the public than we're giving them credit for. We're acting as if they're pariahs. I don't believe that. I think they are amazing and that some of the worry around that is unwarranted. But back to being flexible, making up time in the summer over the summer breaks from school. Maybe that's not even just this summer. Maybe it's also next summer, depending on how long this goes on, right? So really looking at creative ways to help parents feel like they're working together seems really, really important on behalf of their kids, which means that, you know what, if I'm not seeing my kiddo for their dinner break this week, because we've decided that's an unnecessary transition, how about you set up the iPad in the kitchen and my kiddo and I cook together on the iPad, right? During what would have otherwise been my dinner break. We need to be creative. We need to be thoughtful. We need to keep our kids engaged. We need to keep our anxiety down, right? I think those are the things that we're all helping parents think about for their kids.
Thank you. Um, Beautiful. Yeah, I'm scrolling questions here. There was a good question about if a parent works in a grocery store, how do you ensure increased safety in both households? I think what you said, Karen, was one of the helpful things would be for the parent who may be exposed to assure the other parent of efforts that they are making to make sure that they are not exposing themselves in an unwarranted way to the virus. You know, the other thing that I'm aware of in this discussion is that we're talking about how to help parents communicate and how to help them work together during an unbelievably stressful time. And there are going to be people with children who are unwilling or incapable of doing that. About a parent who is so clearly flaunting guidelines and exposing themselves in a really irresponsible way. Or the parent who, for no good reason that they can support, decides to cut off contact between the child and the other parent without any reason other than situation has changed, it's a pandemic. Those are situations that might well be exactly what litigating family law attorneys are going to need to address, because one way of thinking about litigation in family law, it is an exercise in boundary setting. And a lot of the work we do and we talk about is how we help people set boundaries themselves and support them in figuring out what those boundaries will be and support them in following through in implementing those boundaries. If people are incapable, then I'm sorry I offended you, Chris. Sorry. People are incapable.
She knows where her bathroom is.
That's okay. That's okay. If people are incapable of doing that, then that is when the family lawyer comes into play. The question about whether, you know, what paragraph of a parenting plan you engage in, that you implement, frankly, those should be decent discussions between the parents, right? And that's sort of what you guys are saying. And if the parents can't have the discussion, then what a shame to spend the money to go to, a court commissioner and have a commissioner decide what part of the parenting plan would be implemented at that point. It's a lot of money spent for something that you can certainly work out without the need of litigation. It has its role. That's the role of litigation in many ways. Next
Joe,
question.
Can I jump in on something? Which is, I would like to say to family law attorneys who are more accustomed to that litigation style where we're talking about parental rights and above and beyond the everyday, this is a time when we want to be thinking about what's right for kids. We need to be fighting together for what's right for kids, not fighting over parental rights right now. I don't think parental rights should be violated. I don't think parents should lose their rights, obviously, but I think what I wish attorneys were more often able to say is a little bit what Chris had just said, which is, what difference does it make? If there's one thing that's maybe a takeaway when a parent is, really taking a somewhat extreme position or really wanting to fight about something that if they could just loosen up would relieve the pressure in the two-home family system, I wish attorneys could say, let's be honest, what difference does it make? We are in the middle of a pandemic. Let's keep everybody safe within reason. Let's keep everybody engaged. Let's make sure kids stay connected to their families and their parents. It's just hard to fathom. This isn't the time to be thinking about how to run to court.
Unless you got to.
Unless you got to. Like I said, there's that 10 to 13%, Bill Luddy would agree, folks who can't do it any other way. They, for whatever reason, have not been able to transcend their need to be in conflict. That's not who we're talking to.
So I apologize if this has been, talked to death here, but I'm sitting here and I don't have a sense of guidance around this. And that is that what I'm hearing you guys say is parents got to work together. They have to work together. They have to come up with a plan that is in the child's interest, that is responsive to the child's. And an important part of the child's needs is to have contact with both parents. If to the extent that the child is having that contact before the pandemic hit, it's important that they continue with that. That's my sense of what you're saying. However, we're getting questions that still, I'm not sure what the answer is. So they basically are saying, the questions seem to be similar in that the question is, what if one parent is a good faith parent and is doing everything they can, but they're a frontline medical worker. They are a person who is much more likely to be exposed to this virus than other people in our community right now. And the other parent says, I'm really uncomfortable having, child or children go to that other house, spend time there, and come back into my house. I'm uncomfortable with that. How do we address that? And again, I apologize if you've already answered that specific question, but I think it's important for people to have very clear guidance, I think, in how to address that particular problem. What do I, as the parent who is being careful not to be exposed and expose our child to the virus, has another parent who's a responsible person who may be working in a grocery, maybe a frontline medical person. What do we do? How do we have those conversations? What kind of conversations do you recommend the parents have? Again, my apologies if you've answered that.
No, well, let's break it down so that it's really, really clear. One is they need to be having the conversation. Number two, we need to be using our prefrontal cortex for this, not our anxiety, for measuring safety. In other words, I think our frontline health workers, again, and I don't know if you've been into a grocery store in the last 24 hours, they've implemented a whole bunch of safety standards now about standing 6 feet from a cash register and that sort of thing. Very interesting. We need to be being thoughtful about how this actually transmits and is contagious. And it's fear. Fear is contagious. And of course the virus is as well, but there are prudent measures that we can take. So let's be thinking, not using fear to help us think this through. Let's be having the conversation. What are we doing? What are our best practices and are those being followed? Okay, those are two things. The next thing is I want you to have empathy. What if you're the parent? What if you were the parent who was the respiratory therapist at the University of Washington Hospital, working double shifts when your kids were with their other parent? What if that was you? And it's finally, it's your residential time, you're off duty. Are you saying that you would believe, knowing everything that you were doing, that you shouldn't see your children? Is that what you're saying? Because in our one-home families across America, that is not happening. That is not happening. In our families that live together, our frontline people are going home and being comforted by and are in connection with and are following all the best practices to protect everyone in one home. So something about what we're doing and making and creating an anxiety about this, about either not being able to control something that we can't control, we can't. We can't control everything, right? I don't know if I'm making sense, but we've got to help with the empathy piece. We've got to be thinking. We've got to be using empathy. We've got to assume and talk about and be clear about best practices that need to be followed. We need to be using our healthcare providers as consultants if we need them, because maybe a child is more vulnerable than the average bear. That's what we'd be doing in one home. How is it that we think somehow in divorce in a two-home family, we're going to just do a whole different set of rules? Because for the children, it's their family. This is their family. Both parents are their family. Their step-parents are part of their family. Their step-siblings are part of their family. So how do we understand this in the context of a family? Otherwise, we run the risk of anxiety driving the train, making this an opportunity for a land grab. I'm going to finally pay you back for all the other things I think you do wrong, like the fact that you don't feed the kids organic broccoli. As I say to parents, don't ever bring that up in my office, right? So
Yeah, because you hate broccoli.
what's that?
You hate broccoli.
Well, goldfish crackers for the win. But you know what I'm saying? This isn't a competitive sport. And I want to remind people, connection, connection, connection. It strengthens us. It strengthens us as humans. Our immune systems are dependent on it. So I'm not saying recklessness. I'm just saying we need to be thinking. We need to be clear. We have guidelines. They need to be followed. We want to be connected, and our kids need to be connected. We don't want to take a pandemic and turn it into a traumatic childhood experience.
I just saw too that there's like a good question there about, what if you have a, 50-50 schedule and then one is awaiting a test. And I would say that's a conversation to have. Like the parent who's awaiting the test, what do they think? Are they, proposing that the child should be with them? I mean, this is where common sense comes in. If I was a parent who was awaiting my test, I don't think I'd be going, yeah, I'm going to be.
Come on over.
Yeah. I would want support in like communication, because there's so many other things that are happening. The child might be worried about that parent. The other parent, if it were me, I'd want as much kind of FaceTime or however I would want to have a say in how that works, because you may be on the other end. So at one point you may be the parent who is actually awaiting a test. And what do you want? How do you want to be supported? That's when you pull out of the stops and you say, okay, what can I do for you? Do you want lots of FaceTime? I hope you're feeling better. This is a chance to really show your kid that no matter what's going on, if they're old enough to kind of see this, what's going on? This is where you act like family and you care about that other parent, even if
100%.
you really don't, you know, like as an adult, you're not so keen on them, but showing that when times are, when there's trouble, that families come together in those really basic ways. So with all of these, I would suggest one, asking the question. I mean, asking that parent what they need or what they're envisioning, creating a different sort of dialogue, and thinking about how the kids are witnessing this. I wouldn't want my child with me if I was awaiting a test. I would want them to, you know, but that's me.
And frankly, if I was taking an unnecessary flight for a vacation and I was flying back, I would want to hang out for a couple of weeks
Mhm.
until I was sure I hadn't just brought the virus back home with me. I mean, we can be responsible as adults ourselves, set our own limits. Why make our co-parents do it? I want to go take a trip. I want to go take a trip. It's spring break. I don't have the kids. I'm going to go take a trip. Well, then I should quarantine myself for 14 days. It's a best practice. It's not a mystery. It's a best practice.
That's a great point, is that we can determine for ourselves, you know, we don't need a co-parent to tell us. We can determine, and we can make that transparent. If I really feel strongly that, you know, I want to take high risk stuff, then I can also say, and I totally understand that you're not comfortable with that. This is what I suggest. I do want to also make sure that, kind of getting a little bit to the piece around having your children at home, and some just really basic, some of the things that might be difficult for kids and parents. We're all living it. So
Good. Let's get in. I want to make sure we move to the questions. It's okay. I sent you guys a question that came in by email earlier. Remember that? I can. Best thing to do is, if Julie, if you could send it again on the question queue, because we're kind of running along on the railroad. And so there is sorry. Yeah, so another question from our colleague Bruce Pruitt-Ham. A study from China of 70,000 COVID-19 cases showed 0 deaths for 0 to 9-year-olds and 0.2% for 10 to 19. This implies low risk for severe young children from COVID. It is presumed children can transmit the virus. Thus, how should parents factor in the risk that children pose to third parties such as grandparents or other caregivers? Kind of already answered that, but if you want to try to, to address that particular question again.
The one thing that I would say is the numbers coming out of China, unless they've come through the World Health Organization, might be a little sketch. I just want to be honest about that. I think our own healthcare providers in this country, if we're talking about Dr. Fauci and beyond, are really suggesting that some of our children are vulnerable, and we are seeing some vulnerability among our teens. So I don't want to be transmitting any information here that could result in any kind of, and I know that was not Bruce's intention at all by bringing those numbers in. I want to be clear about that. Just saying, I think for our sake, we want to really be listening to what are the current statistics here in this country. And we are, there have been some cases, not fatal, but nonetheless really sick cases. So I want to just balance that. Clearly our elderly, we don't want kids out playing in play groups in the park right now and then going to grandma's house. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we shouldn't be doing. That is not best practices. So, the Center for Child Development at Harvard, the people like Dr. Fauci, there are a number of highly respected infectious disease folks who are out there talking about, here are just good general guidelines. we can get good information. Stay away from the political stuff. I can absolutely agree that this is not a political conversation. This is a healthcare conversation. And it's a healthcare conversation that's happening to families. It's not a political conversation. It's actually not a legal conversation. And so we want to be guiding people to the right sources for information.
A question here from a concerned parent. My children's father, under quote normal circumstances, has been angry when my son was goofy a lesson he was trying to give to the kids, teaching them cursive writing. He pushed my 15-year-old son out of his chair, pushed the chair over on him, and yelled at him, "What's your glitch?" Now he is going to really push the kids about studying. And I'm afraid for my son and for other children who are forced by their father to take sides, for instance, by making the other two answer the question, who can tell me how blank was bad? I know that the kids need to see their father, but I'm very afraid that their dad had trauma. Comments?
I would say that sounds like it's something that extends way beyond the pandemic right now, that this is an issue that's probably needs to be addressed in a more comprehensive way. But I don't know if that's something that we can wrap our heads around right now. I don't know, Karen, what do you think? It just seems like a bigger question.
It's a much bigger question. We're really talking about, when people are having difficulty with skillful parenting under any circumstance, it only gets more, it often gets more difficult under a stressful circumstance. And Yoshimi, I think this was your point before, how it can kind of cause polarizing in parenting. And so we want to be aware that if a parent is struggling with unskillful parenting practices, abusive practices, physical violence, that still needs to be addressed swiftly. Children need to be protected from that, pandemic or not. This is not about, that is not the reason or the methodology for keeping kids connected with a parent. They need to be protected first and safe and then connected. There are many ways to be connected even to a parent who is struggling with family violence or any other kind of unskillful parenting. Those processes need to be implemented here as in any time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There was a question about, I saw too, that the kind of the same thing as the daytime schedules, how do we do a daytime schedule with when there's differences? And I don't want to go too far into it, but I think that's such an important question. I might say that don't strain so hard to have exactly the same schedule. You're gonna make it too hard on yourself. It would be better to have a conversation with the other parent about, what are our major goals? We might have different needs in the family. There might be one person, there might be in the other home, other kids and parents. So kind of just trying to create a general sense. But when it comes to differences, if you're generally in the same ballpark, go with it. It's just, this is not creating an academic sort of like homeschool in that sense. It's really, how do we help our kids during this time and keep their minds engaged? So, a lot of people are saying, don't get so focused on the academics, allow your children to do deep dives into things. And I tell this to my parents all the time, sometimes you're going to disagree, and instead of trying to persuade each other, just gently kind of stand and like, I like to picture this for parents. I like to tell them, and kids also, is that when you're trying to persuade, sometimes you just have differences. Sometimes you can just say, yes, and this is where I'm at, just wanted to let you know. And I always picture kind of just like you're standing on a grassy knoll. You're not kind of lunging forward and trying to go and grab the other parent and get them to stand with you. You're not cowering either. You're just kind of saying, and this is where I'm at. And so this is what I'm going to be doing in my house. And being able to express empathy or understanding of the other parent's concerns and working with that. But ultimately, sometimes it's okay for you to have your own stance without trying to persuade, without getting into conflict. And this is one of those times. No one's going to come to your home and see if you're exactly on that schedule. And if they are, it's probably doing more harm than good.
Yeah, I
Got a-
agree. And I think though it is important and helpful for the children to have a reasonable routine and reasonable expectations. And again, I think it's the same for the parents and the kids. Empathy and then flexibility and understanding, the same kind of themes goes along. It needs to be exercised. But for example, for teens, I had one parent who allowed teens to sleep until 4 p.m. and then get up and then play games over all of the night and then go to sleep. And I said, that's really not helpful. And so I think just to, again, this is not for the parents' sake or your co-parents' sake, but just to have a general wake-up time. Let's say, encourage the kids to be up by noon or 1 or whatever you can agree. And a few minutes late, and that's not a big deal. And then also have a generally agreeable bedtime to encourage them the reasonable bedtime so that their biological clock remains with the sun, right? And so another thing is I had a creative parents who took their subjects. So for example, in that case, the father took math, science, and whatever. Mom took language arts and history and art. And then, so they're not interfering on each other's how to do the part. But they just said, okay, I'm going to be generally responsible of those subjects. And then I may use online, I may use just reading, so whatever. So they're trying to be creative, but then each parent is not necessarily, they're not commenting or allowing them to intervene with each other's scheduling. Also, homeschooling guidelines says that 3 hours is considered to be a full day of study when they are at home. So if anybody is striving to be like 6-period study schedule, probably that's not realistic. And the last thing I'd like to say, because we have been talking about relationship and stay connected and allowing for the teens to stay connected with their friends is very, very important. And so maybe this time that you may have to be a little bit flexible about their being on the phone, on an Instagram or the chatting, any sort of device that they can use to stay connected, you may have to be a little bit flexible with their time and use of it.
Two things. First, just to read a comment that came in. Minor correction to the information we got about Governor Inslee's yesterday's proclamation is mandatory and not optional, but it can be punished as a misdemeanor. So that doesn't discount the wiggle room that is built into it. Thank you, Mark. That was helpful. Here's a question that follows on to what you guys are talking about, which is you're home all day with kids. Yoshimi, you've talked about the idea of having a schedule, and you've talked about the idea of the 3 hours of study is what demanded. What are some other ideas have that can keep the kids, of course, depending on age, keep the kids from going nuts and therefore drive their nuts? What are ways of dealing with that in this time? What are the creative things that we can do? And how does that impact the screen time?
I think a lot of parents are really struggling because, the first week is really how am I going to kind of transition my whole work life and into being home? That might be the focus. And now we're kind of running into, okay, this was harder than I thought, because I also have this other layer, if you have kids with you, about how do I set them up. And if they're younger, so some of the things that younger kids might kind of feel like, well, you're home, why aren't you, hanging out with me? Why aren't you playing with me? And trying to manage those sort of normal questions. I think some structure, this is where you're telling kids about, they need clear expectations about, this is what our world looks like right now. And this is what, I'm going to orient you to this, that I'm going to be home, but I'm going to be working because we're working really hard to keep everybody as healthy as possible. And maybe you have some creative ways, a schedule of activities for them. But building, I think it's probably helpful to really build in breaks in which you do some family time or you do some playtime, so that they're not trying to manage the whole day with you. Or if you have one parent, let's say, that's not working, still they need some breaks. And so being able to build some family time, because that's the opportunity here, is we get more time with our kids. And so I think just kind of creating that schedule, maybe for older teens too, having that same sort of commitment to we reconnect, but expectations, being realistic with children young or old. This is hard.
Anyone else?
I think just to piggyback on what Chris said is, oftentimes it won't be until evening that people even can come up for a breath. Kids will have probably been on their screens all day. They might be a little hyper as a consequence of that. They are probably needier than they normally are because they're not getting enough wiggles out and that sort of thing. But just remembering that if we can take that hour or two in the evening, maybe we can try to have dinner together, even if normally we don't always get to. We can't go to ballet lessons right now. There is no volleyball practice. Maybe we play a game together. I think it's that whole thing about how do we downshift as a family? How do we do this? How do we make family time a time when we sort of refuel and kind of reset, because we're all having to reset.
Mm-hmm. And I think in taking breaks, perhaps throughout the day, because many of us are working out of home, or who are able to work out of home, perhaps built in going outside time with your kids, even just walking in a neighborhood or just taking fresh air or anything that's going to allow all of us to take in the fresh air and regulate ourselves again. And again, if we were walking together, then that's enhance our connectivity with each other, and while taking some fresh air, and then also perhaps talking with each other too, 6 feet apart.
Unless it's an infant. And maybe just take a second about, what about our babies, right? This is a really, really tricky time for two-home family life where there's a baby involved. And so, I want to just point that out. I think that, again, if our co-parents can really rise to this occasion, we might be, deciding that we're wearing masks, but remember, breastfeeding babies have a little bit indemnified, immunologically, they're usually pretty strong. But that skin-to-skin time of a parent with a baby, both parents, if at all possible, if we can maintain that during this time, that's what's going to strengthen everybody. That's where that bonding and secure attachment occurs. So again, safely, best practices, doing what we need to do, really washing thoroughly, making sure our clothes are clean. Well, of course, skin to skin, we don't need to have any clothes there, but point being, things are really important. And so what we don't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater, no pun intended. We want to be sure that there's plenty of bathwater, that it's good and clean, but that our babies are close to both of their parents.
I kind of in my family, part of it is that we created, it took some time, it was under duress, but we created kind of a little bit of a schedule, just real blocked out, but a bunch of resources that provided by the school, and some, based on our own interests, as resources for each one of those kind of areas. So you know, being able to, so that our teen, we have a teen and we have a child who's 8, that they can do some of the planning themselves. And that's kind of part of what they do in the morning, is that they wake up in the morning and they have a half an hour planning time of what am I going to do in all these little sections. So they get a little bit of wiggle room about where they, you know, what they want to study or what they want to get into. And they're good to go. If they want to do engineering with Legos, awesome, you know, but we have stuff kind of already set up for them so that they're a little bit more independent that way. And you can, you know, so those are some ideas too. I have on my website, I created some creative writing prompts, things that they don't really do at school so much these days. I kind of do a lot more of that structured writing. And so this is the time to maybe explore different areas. You know, you can come back to school next year as, you know, a, you know, martial artist. I mean, you can learn a lot in this, you know, however long this is. And it's kind of an opportune time for people to kind of have some interesting goals.
Interesting. Go ahead.
Reading for pleasure. Oh, sorry. I was going to just add to the list, reading for pleasure, because all kids have a mandated reading list during the school years. And, you know, sometimes they really don't have time to pick their book of their choice. So I think this is a great opportunity.
And all I was going to say, imagine if we were 4 13-year-old girls and we were all working on a project together. So, you know, help our kids figure out how to use Zoom, get 4 of them together, you know, have them do some, you know, write a play, whatever. Let's use our technology to its best impact to break the social isolation, but to have them be constructive for an hour or two, you bet.
A request I have for the people who are watching this is the ideas of how to get your kids engaged. If anybody has ideas, you send them to me at my email, which is joe@josephschaub.com, joe@josephschaub.com. Don't put a C in Schaub. They'll get bounced back. Send the ideas and I will compile them. And we're going to start putting stuff on the County Collaborative website for people, ideas, things like that. So send that to me and I will some ideas that I'll get posted in the next few days. Okay.
Joe, also people should look on Twitter. I mean, the most amazing resources by educational people on Twitter, ideas, incredibly creative, just a wealth of information.
Thanks, Karen. Excellent. How do these things on Twitter?
How do they do it? You know, you start by searching, you know, you could probably search just educators first, and then you're going to come up with people who are really, and then just look and see who might be posting, you know, pandemic ideas, or you kind of look at what the hashtags are, which off the top of my head, I'm not sure. But that would be the way that you'd at least start. Then you get lost in the rabbit hole of Twitter, which can be its own experience. But I find that it's amazing resource.
Okay, comment. I am concerned that if we suggest the parenting plan is only a suggestion, we should be flexible. This will undermine the role of the parenting plan in structuring the interactions going forward. So actions taken now will impact situations in normal situations. Also, while I agree that relying on our connection as co-parents can allow us to have flexibility, if that connection is not currently substantial, it can't be created immediately. I worry about the dedicated parent who is listening here, the one trying to figure best practice, who is always the facilitator and is now being told they need to do even more. Self-care and not ragged trying to facilitate is not reciprocated is also important for our children. Comments?
Yeah, I was kind of looking at that. This is, I can understand why it is kind of threatening in a way to look at the parenting plan and be flexible in that. And I guess I can empathize with that. But I'm also, this is a pandemic. There's really not, we have to be flexible. And I do believe that there will be some sort of way to be able to kind of right the ship a little bit when we get out of this. But you can have boundaries and be flexible. You don't have to agree to everything. It's just saying that you're open to certain things, knowing what's most important to you or what you need and what you can kind of give up. I think if both parents do that, we're going to be in a better place. But yeah, I guess I just wanted to kind of empathize with it. It is difficult. That's that fear-based thinking. If I do this now, what's going to happen later?
Anyone else?
I absolutely agree. And I think that we never know when lightning's going to strike. And for some co-parenting pairs who have been, unwilling to be flexible or thoughtful or get on the phone on behalf of their children, this might be that lightning bolt that really shifts their co-parenting relationship to a completely new level, different level that they actually didn't know they could do, should do, would do, or what the benefits to their children would be when they did it. And maybe now's the time that they learn that. Now's the time when they go, wait a second. Yeah, we need a parenting plan as a floor. It's not our ceiling, right? We need to know where to stand when we can't come to agreement. In the future, that'll still be there. We're not talking about, torching it or, throwing it out the window or any of those things, but we are saying, you know what? Be good parents first and follow your parenting plan second. And if you're doing that well, there's no harm in finding out how to do that in the face of a pandemic. Nothing's going to demand it more than now.
Good question from our colleague, Mark Weiss. Self-care is always important and doubly so during times of stress. Perspective is similarly important. Do you have recommendations for self-care and perspective taking for parents who are suddenly with their kids at home 24/7? Recommendations for self-care and perspective taking for parents.
Ask for help. Some of it, I guess that's kind of almost, kind of piggybacking on what you were saying, Karen, too. Some of the most profound moments.
I think that,
some of the most profound moments come when you ask for help. And sharing that vulnerability with your co-parent may be appropriate, may not be, but I know for myself, when I go, hey, I'm really struggling here, that sometimes I really get a great response because it's because the other co-parent, they understand as well, and they recognize the ability for that when they need help to ask. But I also think self-care also means not holding unrealistic expectations for yourself. That goes right along with not trying to create some sort of amazing school program. Go for the big, the big general idea. But this is not when you're going to be super, super graceful. And show your kids what it's like to be not super, super graceful in an okay way. So self-care, less perfection, ask for help. If your kids can be, independent for a little bit, go and do that, whatever you need to do for your own physical well-being or mental health, meditate, run, whatever it is.
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I agree. I think everybody has different coping methods that we use. And what is that works best for your mental health and physical well-being. I cannot emphasize enough about the physical activity being really a great medicine for all of us, even for 10, 15 minutes that we can get outside with your children. And maybe taking a bath or put the kids into bed early, and then so that you can have a little bit of alone time in the evening.
I think the other thing is to be aware of your nutrition. It's really easy to start noshing when you're home all day. I don't know about anybody else, but if you keep chocolate in the pantry, wouldn't restock that. Just think that can get to be a little bit much. So watch how you're eating, that you're eating balanced, that you're eating well. Watch the alcohol intake as always, or edibles for that matter. Let's not be managing our stress by dampening it with alcohol or medications that are not prescribed. The other piece around self-care is mitigating how much you watch the news, to be honest, especially around your kids. Please be aware that they hear everything. And as things escalate, we might be hearing about more deaths, for example, or more hospitalizations, or the stress that our healthcare workers are under. Not sure that's helpful. Be aware of what's your limit so that you're setting that around that. And lastly, be aware that as this goes on, your children are going to start to grieve the loss of structure and normalcy in their life. And when children grieve like they did when they were going through the divorce and other important times in their lives, we often see really squirrely behavior that can be stressful when we're already under stress. You know, it might be sullen behavior, it might be more oppositional behavior, it might be a little more sibling fighting, things that indicate to us that kids are just really in general struggling with the amount of change and loss and uncertainty in their lives. So we want to be, and I'm actually going to have Chris do this because she's so much better at it than I am, but you know, how do you talk to kids? How do you get underneath that behavior that you're going, what the heck? And then you say, take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Karen. You know, it's not jumping to conclusions, really slowing yourself down. So that being curious works really well for kids, and they don't expect it all the time. So when your kid is, they're going to have they might have like a lot of conflicting feelings. They might have like, I hate my teachers, I hate school, and I miss school at the same time. You know, I didn't realize it, but you know, I actually am, I miss my gang of friends in ways that I didn't expect. I mean, maybe I thought it was great to have a little time off school, but I didn't expect this. So you're going to get a lot of these feelings, and it might not always make sense. So the ways that I often will talk to kids is find those moments where it's a little slower, where there's no rush. And sometimes I use the third person. I kind of say, you know, a lot of adults feel this way, and a lot of kids, I think, feel this way. What about you? So that they can kind of join in that conversation. If they say that they're scared of something, don't jump in right away and try to take that away from them. Just ask them questions about like, you know, so like tell me more about what's up with that, or tell me more about that, or oh, that's really interesting. And maybe share a little bit appropriately of what you're feeling as well. But the way to get kids to talk is be interested in them, and to not move too fast, and do it bit by bit. So I guess that would be, you know, staying really curious, slowing way down. I do have a lot of times when we think we know what kids are feeling and we move in with a lecture too soon, we really cut them off. And I have a you know, experience of when, you know, like being totally on a wrong page with my child, or children in therapy, completely on the wrong page. But when I stop and I go, wait a second, like, I don't know if I got that right. What are you thinking? Then they open up, and then they tell us, you know, what they're really feeling. So this is a time where they really need you to listen, less lectures, slow down.
I also would like to add to the parents how to manage their stress. I think we are allowed to also, as an adult, connect with our friends right? We can connect through the text, we can connect through Instagram, whatever the method that your group use. That my particular girlfriends of 14 started this earlier, and daily they were sending kind of funny pictures or the movie at that, and then also model the connection that I still have and enjoy with my girlfriends, and also at the same time laughing. Let's not forget the humor, and the act of laughing really releases endorphin and allow us to relax. So I think it's important for us to perhaps seek the opportunity to be able to laugh, and those of us who have Netflix or whatnot, maybe just watch a comedy or so or two, and to create that opportunity.
Yeah, don't go on
That's
Netflix and watch
scientific.
movies about a pandemic.
Okay.
Okay.
Lots of humor, lots of the comedy dry bar. Good stuff for them.
Comedy dry bar?
Yeah, it's just got all sorts of different comics on it. It's pretty funny. Usually pretty appropriate.
So this may be for someone who came in a little later, but what does a parenting coalition look like? Are you guys hearing me okay? It says your internet connection is cool. Am I cutting in and out or no?
A little bit.
Not right now.
Okay. What does a parenting coalition look like for a household that has 2 or more sets of children going between multiple homes? So perhaps there are 3 households connected by 1 house in the middle. Do you recommend that the parents from all 3 homes work together to come up with agreements?
Yes, if they can, that's your ideal. So I belong to a 4 household family. And what I mean by that is I have a daughter and son-in-law and 2 grandbabies in one household. We've got the other grandmother and an uncle a teenage uncle who live in another household. And then my kids' father lives in a 3rd household, and then there's their household. And all of us consider ourselves very much a part of this family, and we all live very, very close to one another, right? We had a conversation about what were the rules for the road for these 4 residences and how we would relate to make sure that we kept everybody safe. And the consequence of that, at the beginning, everybody was on the same page. And then the consequence of that, one of the households has recently stepped away for virtue of the fact that Grandpa doesn't believe he can maintain the same level of protection at the moment as a response to where he lives. So that's an example of a family coalition coming together and really establishing how do we maintain best practices across 4 residences on behalf of everyone. So we have a teenage child and then a toddler and a baby. How are we going to make sure, and of course 3 grandparents, none of us elderly, by the way, how do we keep us all healthy, right? And so that's the same model that can be used in a complex step family where, we've got the step family here, but there's children in this family that go out to another family over here and children in this home that go out to another family over there. And really we could have as many, extensions of how that might work and how people are touching one another. Again, best practices, using our prefrontal cortex. We're thinking this through. We're not fearing our way through it, right? We have to be thinking our way through it. So yes, that's how a parenting coalition would work.
Beautiful.
And
Thank
I
you.
think I agree. Oops, sorry, Joe.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the point about each person being able to make their own decision too is important. So you're interrelated, but you also can say, like we were talking about the vacation or whatever it is, it's okay to say, I need to step out of this. And then everybody should be talking about, okay, well, how do we still connect you with, given that decision? We have got grandma who I'm just kind of close. She's 85. She's going to stay over there. I wish I could visit with her, but until we've spent 2 weeks, I'm just not going to risk it. And so, figuring out ways to make sure she's connected. We have also, we talk about right before the transition, my son's other, the dad and stepmom and sister, need reassurance that we have been following all the guidelines. This is what's been happening, so that they can kind of have that transition feeling comfortable. I just think we all kind of try to respond to each other about what we can do and what we can't do, and how we can accommodate each other at this really difficult time. That's my coalition.
Another question. How do I ask my co-parent to keep me apprised of his social engagement or any engagement with people the child is with me during this pandemic time, especially when they're
I might, first of all, I might reassure them about what you're doing and what you're not doing, that you're not trying to intrude on that person's time, or you're not trying to kind of get inappropriate information about their personal life. You might want to say, hey, this is really what I'm concerned about. And this is kind of what the guidelines I'm following. And I would really be helpful for me, or for, to kind of know what's going on in your house, so that I'm feeling safe. Reassure them on why you want that information. They may or may not offer it, but if you can offer it in a way that's reassuring, understandable, clear, transparent, probably have a much, much better chance.
Anyone else? That was a good one. That was a good answer. Any embellishment?
Other than right now, we shouldn't be socializing with people outside of our households. I mean, it's, again, back to best practices.
Right. Yoshimi, will you speak for a bit on how a parenting coordinator or a parenting coach might be helpful to people? There have been a few questions about that.
About the same question? For the same
Yes,
question?
there have been a number of questions about the use of a parenting coordinator, a parenting coach in this time.
So to attend the previous, so specific to the question you asked earlier, or in general?
In general.
Oh,
during
I
this
see. I see. So I have been at the beginning, especially when the school went there, there was a sense of panic of my parents, because it just happened all of a sudden, and this kind of things never happen all of a sudden, and how to set up and what are the rules and what they're doing. So, I mean, good example being that this particular parent, this is way before the governor's current proclamation, or even the previous proclamation, that this particular mom immediately set up the plan between herself and her other moms in the neighborhood and in the school community, and it completely excluded the father joining into part of the schooling, or the part of the extracurricular, or the plan. And so she, I think in some ways, are trying to really rigidly stick with this, and yet I felt this is a place where she can be flexible and then ask for help by using the first rights of refusal kind of rights, and then ask the father first to join and help her out before she rely on, say, community resources or her neighbors. So I feel, and then other examples that I gave earlier, that how to really set up the consistent schedule within a reason, or how to coordinate the kids' activities and what you are doing. So in general, I think I am by facilitating the discussion between the two households and for the parents to be on the same page as things start changing. But my general guide is definitely, as Karen has been saying, that what is a health risk and what is health professionals are saying. And I use the CDC guidelines and remind them, what we should be all practicing, whether we are parents or not. This is our social responsibility.
Beautiful. That's okay. So we're 10 minutes from the end of this. And so what I'd like each of you to do is if there is something we haven't touched on that is important that you'd like to share, I'm going to give you this opportunity to touch on something or to reiterate something you feel is particularly important. So why don't we start with Yoshimi? Why don't we start with you? Is there anything that we have missed that you believe would be important
Sure.
to add?
Yeah. I'd like to just say, I'd like to add this as a mental health professional, that it's okay to seek for professional help if you need it. You don't have to be able to do everything on your own. And if you really need that professional help, you need to be able to seek it. And by now, almost all my peers switched to online and Zoom kind of set up. And so interesting thing is many of them are saying that they can see more clients because they are not in office, and then they can somehow be more productive by taking clients and switch from, to move along the different clients. So do that. And then also, of course, crisis hotline is available to all of us 24/7.
Beautiful. Thank you, Yoshimi. Any closing thoughts or remarks by you?
Are you talking to me or?
Yes, Kristen.
Oh,
by me?
Kristen. I know, Kristen.
So yeah, I think maybe some ongoing support. Some of these things are, it's hard sometimes when I can't hear people's questions, but I'm thinking that maybe some simple, anybody have ideas to how we might be able to offer some sort of ongoing sort of maybe I can do something in my blog, or maybe Karen, you can do something in your blog about just how to make a simple request, like, hey, how to throw an idea out there in a way that might be more successful or less, more successable. So, okay, so that's one thing I was thinking about. Obviously, I'm an external processor. But the other thing would be somebody was asking about maybe a sample conversation. We didn't get a chance to do that, but we might be able to do some of that in a writing. But for my biggest thing is that I want to emphasize, ask, throw out a question to your parenting partner, and just ask them maybe what they need or suggest what you might need. Also ask your kids, like, how are they doing? I have a 13-year-old who is really, being able to talk about how it feels to be stuck with your mom, for a long time when you really want to be maybe out with your friends, and being able to kind of normalize that. So yeah, that's kind of like, I can imagine being stuck with my parents, that would have been awesome, but allowing your I love my parents, but yeah, with 13, no. So just having more conversations, work on your own anxiety so that you can really be present for yourself and for everybody else too. Just anxiety never helps anything.
Karen.
Yeah, I really want to echo what Chris was saying, which is reach out, get help, ask questions. I know that all of us have, made ourselves readily available via email. We're all working by Zoom, evaluating, when and if and how to be in the office. We also recognize that it's more difficult to work virtually, that there's a big loss in translation. However, under these circumstances, we're going to do the best we can. We're here for kids and families and co-parents and step-parents and parenting coalitions of all sizes and shapes. We're going to get through this. We are going to get through this. But I want to reiterate that this isn't a political conversation, and it's actually not a legal conversation. It's a healthcare pandemic, and we want to rely on the people who have the best information about how to handle a healthcare pandemic. And of course, our local and state governments that are providing guidelines that we're meant to follow at this time. Connect in whatever ways make sense. Stay safe. Use your healthcare providers if you're really worried about your kids. Manage your own anxiety. We're going to get to the other side of this. And meanwhile, we'll all be in it with you. Like I sign most of my stuff from home. Karen, right? From home. Wishing everybody the very best as we get through this together.
Beautiful. Thank you. A few closing. Hello?
Joe?
Yeah.
Hi, Joe. Can I repeat my adjective?
Go ahead.
I really would like us to remember, especially co-parents, to exercise, to have empathy, flexibility, understanding, and teamwork. So
Beautiful.
that's
Thank you.
our task.
Thank you. Excellent. Okay. Well, a few final closing things. Number one, for those lawyers who weren't on at the very beginning, we've applied for continuing legal education credit. If you have in your registration, put your bar number when that is provided. I suspect it will be. I'll enter your names and for 2 hours continuing education credit on a Nexus topic. I'm going to take a moment and just share this screen. And I want to remind you that a lot of information that we're going to be providing, including hopefully a recording of this session for people to access. We're going to stick on the King County Collaborative Law website, kingcountycollab.org. Also, if anybody has an idea or a request for other webinars on topics that we can put together, we'd be happy to put that for you and get good experts so we can lay our hands on for that. We want to provide that as a service. And I think that should be, I think that should be about it. Thank you very much, guys, for joining in this. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Yoshi. Thanks you guys for all your great questions. Stay as healthy as you can. Be safe. Be good to each other. And with that, I'm going to end this meeting. So,
before you go,
yeah.
We want to thank you. This was your brainchild. You pulled this together in 48 hours and just really love you and thank you.
Thank you.
Nice.
Take care, everyone.